Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Parsha Insights. And today we are not going to be spending time on the Parsha, but we will be spending time on the concept of Passover in the eyes of Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, who we've been studying for all of these weeks, his extraordinary insights. And now we're going to get into these concepts of freedom and renewal and everything that Passover is. So let's jump right in. So I'm starting with the idea of Karpas. The topic today is Passover, the spring festival, and we're starting off with the notion of Karpas, which I've included one page from the perennial bestseller, the Canadian Haggadah Canadienne. Unfortunately, no copies left on Amazon, but maybe next year we'll reprint. But in the meantime, Karpas is that moment in the Seder in which we dip a small piece of a vegetable into the salt water and we recite a blessing. Okay, it's one of the simplest, most straightforward mitzvot that we could possibly do, or rituals that are part of the Seder, and that is just a vegetable and salt water. What does it represent? Any thoughts? I mean, there are about 412 excellent answers to this question. So what does Karpas represent?
Growth, vegetation,
Growth, vegetation,
sustenance.
sustenance, absolutely. Why do we dip it in? And so, sorry, just to go back for a second, growth, meaning what? What is the growth that we are representing? Specifically, what growth?
Well, when you plant seeds anywhere, if you take care of them by giving them water and so on, or caring, they grow. Same thing with people, same thing with families, same thing with all kinds of groups of whether it be human or not human.
But what is the growth in the Passover story that we are commemorating? Why is this happening in the Seder?
Because the Jews went from slavery to freedom.
Okay, so there's spiritual growth that we're commemorating, and
Yes.
don't forget also, you know how the Passover story begins? Uvnei Yisrael paru va'yishu, right? Bnei Yisrael were fruitful and they multiplied and they grew. Like the very first part of the story is that the children of Israel go from being a family of 70 people to a nation of a few million. And how did that happen? So part of the story is the growth of the people. Rav Moshe Shapiro is going to bring us on a little bit of a different journey, but I think also, Esther, I want to focus on another aspect that you brought up, which is renewal, which is, I don't know if you mentioned springtime, but vegetation as associated with springtime, because that's an important concept of Passover as well, as we're going to see in just a moment. There's a peculiar allusion in the story of Passover. And the allusion is found in that verse, Vayavidu Mitzrayim et Bnei Yisrael befarech, that the Egyptians worked the children of Israel, and the Hebrew word befarech, it means that they worked them very, very hard, that there was difficult labor. Vayavidu Mitzrayim et Bnei Yisrael befarech. Rav Chaim Vital, in his teachings of the Arizal, his Kabbalistic teachings, points out something very interesting about this verse. You know, we have the concept in Judaism. There's a studying notion that we talk about Rashi Tevot, that there are messages contained within the words of the Torah in the acronyms of the words. If you look at the first letter of every word, sometimes Sofeto, look at the last letter of every word. Sometimes we have gematrias, we have numerical values. There's always other layers of meaning contained within these words. So the Arizal, as we'll see in a moment, I copied this from the original work, V'avidu Mitzrayim. So this is the verse, and they use these little chupchiks, these little quotation marks, as a way of showing that we are taking one letter from every word. We're taking the first letter from each word. Et Bnei Yisrael befarech. To see it up above in the actual verse itself, Et Bnei Yisrael befarech. So if you take the first letter of each of those words, that verse alludes to the concept of
spring.
Aviv, spring. Aviv is spring. So Hine Rashi Tevot, it's Bnei Yisrael Bafarach, these 4 words, it's an acronym for the word spring. So we have a very unusual illusion that's happening here, which is we're describing the ruthless work and labor of the children of Israel. And together with that, we're talking about spring. One is horrible, one is beautiful. As we can say, I mean, and we're studying together now on March 30th, 2 days before the month of April, and it snowed this morning and it snowed yesterday in Montreal, and spring is around the corner, but sometimes it feels a little bit too far away. And spring brings hope, and spring brings optimism and positivity. That's all of the symbolism of spring. And yet what the Arizal is telling us, that in this terrible verse of ruthless labor is found the notion of spring. What is happening? Why is it there? So to answer this question, and stop me at any point, as always, but we're together. So there's a beautiful midrash, a very powerful midrash about the creation of humanity. It's in Bereshit Rabbah. Couldn't find a translation for it, but we'll read it together in the Hebrew. Amar Rabbi Simon. Rabbi Simon says, at the moment when God came to create the first man, the angels, the ministering angels, they divided into different groups, into different cliques. Kitim, chavrot, chavrot, they divided themselves into different groups. Mehem omrim al yibarei, there were certain groups who said man should not be created. I say man with the capital M. Mankind should not be created. Umehem omrim yibarei, and there are those who said no, man should be created. Haduhu dichtiv, this is what it says, is a verse in Psalms, in the 85th chapter of Psalms. Chesed ve'emet nivgashu, that kindness and truth came together. Tzedek v'shalom nashaku, that righteousness and peace, or justice and peace, that they kissed. So you have these different attributes representing the angels that are disagreeing, and they're coming together in different groups. Chesed omer yibarei, so who said what? So kindness, the angels of kindness, but kindness said, yes, create mankind. Why? Shehu gomel chasadim. Because mankind does acts of kindness. Kindness saw, if there's more mankind in the world, there's more kindness, it's good. Ve'emet, and truth, omer al yibareh, said, no, don't create mankind. Why? Shekulo shkarim, because there's so much falsehood in mankind. Don't create. Better not to be created, he says. Tzedek omer yibarei, so justice, charity, righteousness, however you want to translate it, says yes, yes, create mankind. Shur said tzedakot, because he does righteous things. Shalom omer al yibarei, peace said no, don't create mankind. Dechulek tata, because he just fights. That's all he is scuffles and fighting. Me'asa kadosh baruch hu. So what did God do? Natal emet. God took truth, who said, don't create mankind. Vehi shlichu la'aretz. He threw it down on the ground. He demoted it, threw it to the ground. Hadahu dichtiv. That's what the verse means when it says, vatashlech emet arza. Truth was thrown down to the ground. So God gets involved. All the ministering angels are arguing. God gets involved, determines that, yes, mankind will be created. And what's done to truth? Truth is thrown down to the ground. Truth is demoted. Okay? Makes sense? Great. So Rav Moshe Shapiro now is going to say, okay, we have a lot of questions about this midrash, but we're going to ask one question. It's a little bit of a detailed question, but it's an important question. You said truth is against the creation of mankind. God is pro-creation of mankind. So vatashlech emet arza. So God is going to take truth and throw it down to the ground. What is this verse from? It's from the 8th chapter of the book of Daniel. Let's take a look at the context. Where is God throwing truth to the ground? What does that even mean? So in the prophecy of Daniel, in the 8th chapter, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel said, that I, Daniel, after the one that had appeared to me earlier, here's yet another vision. And this is the vision of the goat and the ram. And there's the goat that has the 4 horns, there's the ram that has the 4 horns, and the goat that has the 1 horn. And the goat comes in and destroys the ram, right? The he-goat grew very great. At the peak of his power, his big horn was broken. In its place, 4 conspicuous horns sprouted towards the 4 winds of heaven. From one of them emerged a small horn which extended itself greatly toward the south, towards the east, to the beautiful land. It grew as high as the host of heaven. It hurled some stars of the heavenly host to the ground. It vaunted itself against the very chief of the host. On its account, the regular offering was suspended, and his holy place was abandoned. So this is a vision of the destruction of the Jewish people, the destruction of Jerusalem. And a time will be given for the Tamid, v'tzava tinaten ala Tamid, v'pasha. It hurled truth to the ground. V'tashlech emet arza, v'astav itzlicha, and prospered in what it did. The destruction, meaning it was successful in destroying. And Rashi is going to explain this to us. Rashi is going to say, what are we talking about here? What does it mean? A time will be given for the daily sacrifice. This is a bad thing. We're describing a destruction. What is a time given for the daily sacrifice? Rashi says a time will be given for the daily sacrifice to be discontinued because of idolatry, because of a flagrant devastation, meaning idolatry will be placed in Jerusalem instead of the regular offering. So this verse is saying what's happening with a vision. You don't get too involved in the ram and the goat and whatever. One represents the Jewish people, one represents the enemies. The enemies are coming in, destroying the Jewish people. What's going to happen? A time will be given for the daily sacrifice to end. The destruction will happen, and truth will be hurled to the ground and prospered in what it did, and they're going to succeed in what they want to do, which is destroying the Jewish people. This is not a good verse. And Ramosha Shapiro is going to say, wait a second, let's go back to this midrash. Beautiful midrash. God wants to create the Jewish people, so truth is thrown down to the ground. But if you look at the verse itself, truth thrown down to the ground, that's the destruction of the Holy Temple. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't line up. The verse is discussing the exile in which we find ourselves. When it says truth is cast to the ground, it's referring to Torah, which is truth, which is lowered, cast down to the ground. And it, the kingdom of which the verse is discussing, achieves and prospers. It does all that it pleases, and it succeeds. This is not a good thing. So how are we going to make sense of this? That this destruction is somehow being associated with a positive concept. This is the same question that we started with. How can hard labor be connected to spring, to renewal? These are 2 opposing ideas. And Rav Moshe Shapiro, this is what he does. In the most amazing way, he's going to bring them together and say, how does this all fit together? How does destruction and the growth of mankind fit together? How does hard labor and the birth of the Jewish people, the rebirth of the Jewish people, how does that fit together? The difficult connection, he's going to articulate what we just said. What's the connection between the subject of the verse of the destruction of the temple and the deliberation whether to create man? According to the supporting verse, what the Creator did when he cast truth to the ground was the casting of exile. Very difficult to understand. What link is there between casting truth to the ground as an act of lowering the Jewish people and casting truth to the ground as the solution to truth's opposition to man's creation? Any questions before we go on? And we're just setting up the problem. Problem, pretty straightforward, I think, that we're using the lowering, the casting of truth to the ground in 2 very opposite ways. In one way, it's the destruction of the Jewish people. That's the verse in Daniel. In one way, it promotes the creation of mankind. That's the midrash. Same verse, 2 different functions. How do we reconcile this? How do we balance it? That's the question. Good? Go forward, go backwards, or stay put? Okay. Forward. As we say in the yeshivas, we're going weiter. We're going weiter. Going forward. Okay. And look at the end of that midrash. Amru malachei hashari lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ministering angels said before God, Ribon ha'olamim, ma ata mevazer tachsis al tichsia. So, shalach. Basically, the ministering angels are protesting and saying, God, how can you throw truth down to the ground? Truth, that's your crown jewel. Ta'aleh emet min haaretz. Let truth emerge, right? That's the verse in Psalms. Emet me'eret tismach, that truth is going to sprout forward. So how can truth oppose man's creation as well? So let's talk about the nature of growth, because we're talking about emet and truth and the idea of growth together. What does it mean? The nature of all sowing. So now Moshe Shapiro becomes a botanist, and he teaches us about the nature of plants. The nature of all sowing, whether plants or trees, is that the seed must rot before growth begins. This applies across the entire genus of organic beings, as well as living beings. It encompasses all of creation. The seed must rot before growth begins. And look at what the Talmud says about eggs. Aval gabe beitza emad gadla. When does the chick grow? L'chi misracha, when the egg rots. L'chi isracha afra ba'almahu, and when it rots, it's considered to be as mere dust. So Rav Moshe Shapiro says the chick begins to develop only after the egg becomes ruined and fetid, emitting a terrible stench. In other words, the chick emerges from the complete corrosion of the thing which it is made. The egg and the chick cannot coexist. The egg has to be ruined in order for the chick to emerge. And this is going to be his framework. The seed has to rot before the growth begins. The seed cannot be a perfect seed while there's growth. Growth has to destroy the seed. The seed has to be destroyed for growth to begin. And so he says, this is the notion of the exile that we're talking about. This is the notion of the children of Israel, of befarech, of they're doing this hard work. Amar Rabbi Lazar, says the Gemara in Psachim. Amar Rabbi Lazar, lo higla kadosh baruch hu es Yisrael levein ha'umos, ela kadei sheyit osfu alehem gerim. This is an amazing statement, that God exiled the children of Israel. Now, God could have exiled the children of Israel anywhere. God could have sent the children of Israel exiled to the moon, where there's no one else, or to the middle of a desert or wilderness where they're alone. Exile doesn't by definition mean exiled to be with others who are not you. So why is exile? Why did God do it? The Talmud in Psachim says, why? Ela kadeshi osfu alehem gerim, so that converts would join the Jewish people. Klum adam zorea sa'a elachnis kamakorim. The only reason a person sows a smaller measure of grain was to bring to harvest a larger measure of grain. Sometimes you have to plant a small amount and let it rot in the right environment for greater growth to take place. That's the framework that Rav Moshe Shapiro is giving to us. In other words, when the Creator exiled us among the nations, He's planting us. And the purpose is to cultivate something that never was and produce far more than what existed previously. The sages identified this great yield. What are we planting? As converts. It's an interesting concept that God planted the entire Jewish nation in exile so that converts would be added to us. And then Rav Moshe Shapiro says, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. How many converts have already been added? Can you really say that we've had so many converts to make that this planting in exile make it worthwhile? How does that make any sense? Going back to the concept of numbering, and we're going to try to explain what this means. So there are two places in Genesis that we've studied together before. Vayotze oto hachutza, that God took Abraham outside. Vayomer habetna hashamayma, said, look up, look towards the heaven. Usfor hakochavim, count the stars. Im tuchal lisporotam, if you're able to count them. Vayomer lo ko zarecha, thus will your offspring be. So the point is, at least the pshat, there are a lot of ways to understand this verse, but at least the pshat, the simple understanding is that will be innumerable, that the children of Israel will be as many as the stars. Can you stand outside and count the stars? No, you can't count the stars just by going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So will your offspring be. I saw a beautiful, I'm going to confuse us a little bit with another interpretation, which is not the pshat, which is not the simple understanding. I saw a beautiful interpretation, which said that this was describing the nature of the children of Israel. Because you know what the Jewish people are supposed to do? God says, go count the stars. So most people would look up at the sky and say, it's impossible. There are too many. And so one teaching said, but you know what a Jew is supposed to do? God tells you to count the stars. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're supposed to start. You're supposed to try. Ko zarecha, so will your offspring be. They're going to be stubbornly determined, even when it seems impossible. They're going to want to count the stars, even when it seems absolutely impossible. Another concept, your descendants from the 28th chapter of Genesis, your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. So what's the common denominator between the stars and the dust? Impossible to count. That's the nature. That's the message that we're getting from Genesis, from God's promises to Abraham, that the Jewish people will be so numerous, will be impossible to count. What's the question? Question is, did you read the CJN article from last week with the census? You know how many Jews there are in Montreal? I don't know the exact number, but people know.
They said 90,000.
90,000, which is an amazing number, and it's
up. It's up,
and it's up, right? That's Jewish optimism. It's up by 1,200 people over 11 years, and that's great. Okay, Baruch Hashem, there are more Jews living in Montreal today than there were 10 years ago, and that's absolutely a very good thing. So let's take that census and let's go back to the book of Genesis with it. What do you mean the Jewish people are impossible to count? What are you talking about? You can count. We can count people. We can get a fairly accurate. You're saying, okay, so it's impossible to know because people pass away. People are all right. Well, that's too detailed. That's what they call a nudnik point. That's already like you've lost the big picture once you're telling me that we're going to be off by 3 over the course of many millions. We'll be off by 20 people. All right. You know what? I'm not going to worry about that. That means you can count the Jewish people. So if Moshe Shapiro says it's simply not so, all of them can be counted. No one's hiding anywhere. I don't know about that. There are Jews who are hiding. But in generally speaking, it's just not true. What does it mean that they're ungraspable by number? It is possible to count every Jewish person along with their family and any pending birth. We can get the statistics. How are they beyond the limitation of number? What does that mean? So if it means that the Jewish people are going to be so many that we're going to have billions and billions and billions of people, that's not true. And if it means that you can't count them for whatever reason, that's also not true. So what is it talking about? So he says it must be concluded that the new Jewish nation is beyond number because it is not limited to itself. You can't count something that can expand in any direction, even in unpredictable directions, or especially in unpredictable direction. To include convert, you can't count something that's not contained. We are porous. We are allowing people in. We are welcoming people who are coming in. And not only that, you know what the status of the people who come in is? The Talmud in Kritot says, "Ma avosechem lo nichnasu lebris ela b'mila tefillah v'atzas adam." Just as your ancestors came into the covenant through circumcision, through immersion, through talking about a type of sacrifice, So too, a convert comes in the same way through the circumcision and through the immersion and so on. So what the Talmud is doing is comparing converts to our ancestors. Our ancestors converted, converts converted, converts become us. They don't stay as converts. It's an important point. They'll always be converts, but they become, in terms of our prayers, you know, a convert can say a blessing. Why not? Because you might say, you know what the blessing says? Baruch atah Hashem, take any blessing. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, God who has sanctified us with his commandments. When? At the giving of Sinai. Were the converts there? Vitzivanu, God has created us. You know how our Amidah begins, our prayers begin? Elokeinu v'Elokei avotenu, God and the God of our forefathers. Can somebody who's been Jewish for 10 minutes talk about our forefathers? And the answer is yes, that we see converts as being a part, to the degree that they are part of the history of the Jewish people, that our history becomes their history. The covenant of the Exodus can be manifest upon anyone in the world, transforming them into a descendant of Abraham, like a newborn child, rendering them Jewish. Not only that, the Mishnah Melech, which is a commentary on Maimonides, on the Rambam, when Rambam talking about the mitzvah, the law of the first fruits, and talks about whether a convert can make the declaration of the first fruits, because they weren't there when the land was divided amongst the tribes, where the converts weren't there. Their ancestors weren't part of it. So are they part of it? So Maimonides says, yes, they are part of it. And the Mishnah of the Melech says, why are they part of it? Because in the future, because the declaration of the first fruits is a forward-thinking declaration. The Kevan Shekain, so even though a convert, lo natnu chelek ba'aretz, they were not given a portion of the land of Israel originally when Joshua, when the children of Israel came into the land of Israel, it wasn't divided. The converts didn't have a portion, obviously. Mikol makom, however, la'atid lavo, in the future, lu hagerim nachala betoch b'nei Yisrael, converts will have a portion. Everyone who converts to Judaism becomes a Jew with all of the rights of Judaism, including a portion in the land of Israel. There's nothing to exclude. I'm trying to think in Jewish law. What are the exclusionary laws? There's actually there's a law that a convert is not supposed to be a member of a Beit Din for conversion, because it has to do with the laws of testimony and judgment, and one is not supposed to judge one's own case, basically. So a rabbi who is a convert may have some issues being as part of a Beit Din for conversion, as part of a court for conversion. But other than that, converts are full-fledged in terms of being an ancestor, sharing ancestors, and in terms of having a future as well as part of the Jewish people. So springtime, so going back to the idea that Rav Moshe Shapiro is presenting to us, is that, so the idea of the converts, of course, is the expansion of the Jewish people. This is the growth of the Jewish people. Springtime is when what was planted at the time of the beginning of the winter begins to emerge and be revealed. Consequently, the springtime of the Exodus begins from the exile. Springtime is entirely new. For us to become new, our previous existence must be nullified completely and absolutely, just like the seed that's destroyed, just like the egg that has to be destroyed for the chick to be born. So too does the previous existence have to be nullified and destroyed. This idea of the springtime becoming a part of our essence, being Passover is not just Passover. And we read about this in the Haggadah. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, right? Hare ani keven shivim shana. Elazar ben Azariah. This is the famous midrash which talks about Elazar ben Azariah, who overnight grew a long beard, and had the appearance of a senior member, even though he was very young. He now was like a man of 70 years, and I've never understood I didn't understand why we say we remember the departure from Egypt at night until Ben Zoma explained it to me. What's the point of Ben Zoma's explanation? Because Ben Zoma says, Egypt, you have to remember all the days of your life. The days represent the days. All the days of your life are the nights, meaning every moment. The days of your life are this world. All the days of your life are the days of the Messiah. All of this is basically saying, when do we remember the Exodus? Always. At every moment. Not just on Passover. At every moment. This idea is so essential to who we are. This idea of renewal, this idea of springtime, this idea of growth is so essential to who we are. We must live the Exodus throughout our lives, meaning we must always be like our ancestors. And the Creator had to cast truth to the ground, not to disgrace it, but to plant it. Why? So the idea of casting proof, and this is an amazing Talmud, a portion of the Talmud, which talks about the world to come and talks about the days, the approach of the Messiah. Ikva to the Mashiach. It's a famous concept. And the Talmud says, what's going to happen before the Messiah comes? Everything's going to fall apart. This is a great Jewish word. It comes from, most people know, it comes from the Talmud. The word being chutzpah. Chutzpah, impudence, yisgei, will increase. High costs will pile up. What's going to happen before the Messiah comes is that the world's going to fall apart a little bit. Although the vine shall bring forth its fruit, wine will be expensive. So there's plenty of supply, but the prices will still be high. And monarchy shall turn to heresy. Our leadership will abandon us. There will be no one to give reproof about this. There will be no opposition who will represent the needs of the people, and the government will become corrupt. The meeting place of the sages will become a place of promiscuity. The Galilee shall be destroyed. The Gavelin will be desolate. The men of the border shall go round from city to city to seek charity, but they'll find no mercy. Okay, it's not a good picture. The wisdom of the scribes will putrefy. People who fear sin will be held in disgust, and the truth will be absent. Ve'ha'emet tehei ne'ederet. The truth will be absent. The youth will shame the face of the elders. Elders will stand before minors, the opposite of what should happen. Normal family relations will be ruined. Okay, people will disgrace within their family. A man's enemies will be the members of his household. The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. His son will no longer be ashamed before his father. And what is there for us to rely? What can we lean on? Alavinu sheba shamayim. It's one approach in the Talmud, which says the Messiah comes when we realize that the only way we can get through this, the only place to rely on is on God, is on God. So part of the description is that truth will disappear, will be absent. So what's happening with truth? Truth is God's crown jewel. Truth is pure, and yet we're seeing these examples of God throwing truth down to the ground. Before Messianic times, God or truth disappearing. What's happening? Isn't truth good? And the answer is yes, truth is good. But when truth is planted, he's using this imagery of truth disappearing. Where does it go? Underground. Truth being cast down in order for something to grow. When truth is planted, it will deteriorate. It is destroyed. But this is necessary so that a new truth, a deeper and unprecedented truth, could be revealed. To go back to that verse that we started with, remember we said that this was Aviv, that the hard work was springtime, was renewal, that the difficult work, you know what Rashi says about this? What happened? Befarach? What is the hard labor? So Rashi says, why is it called befarach? It's an unusual word. Ba'avodah kasha. Hard work. So why befarach? Befarach means to break. Something in Hebrew, that's the word, I'm trying to think of the right word, parib. Something like crispy. Something that's deteriorating. Hamifarechet et haguf umishabarto. So what happens to hard work? It breaks down the body. It causes it to disintegrate. It shatters it. That's what Rashi says, this word bafara. It's a complete, it's breaking it down. It's ruining what is in order for something greater to grow. That's the idea of the hard labor. The Egyptians had broken the children of Israel, literally working them to the bone with labor that crushes the entire body. But in this lies the springtime. One who understands this sees the world differently. They also yearn for deliverance more intensely. They perceive our situation better and even accept it with love. So what does that phrase mean to you? That last paragraph. One who sees this, one who understands this, sees the world differently. What have we understood that now would reframe our existence? Or reframe how we see the world?
Things come and go. They grow in the spring. Everything is hopeful. And then they bloom in the summer and begin its downward trend in the winter. And then they sleep all winter in order to do the whole thing over again.
Yeah.
And
That
that's
there
life.
is that there is a cycle. That when you see winter, don't think that this is the end of it. When you see truth cast down, as we see constantly, we see falsehood prevail, truth cast down. Don't think that's because that's the end of it, that nothing is going to grow, that nothing is going to develop from this. Know that better times lie ahead. I mean, that's for me the whole concept of how the Talmud describes the time leading up to the Messiah, the time leading up to the coming of the Messiah, is a very powerful idea that the Messiah comes after difficult times. So when you see, don't despair just because the world is a tough place, and just because there's a destruction of a temple as described in the book of Daniel. Don't think that there's not another redemption that's about to come. And to take us back to where we started with karpas. We started with the vegetables. And you know what we do? Remember what the custom is? You dip the karpas in the salt water. So what is the salt water? So I heard, and by the way, there are other customs as well. I heard that there are other customs that we dip the karpas into charoset. There are other customs that dip it into charoset, which represents the mortar. So what are you doing? You're putting together the karpas, the vegetable, which is the growth, and the mortar or salt water could be tears, but salt water could also be sweat. You're putting together your growth and your hard work and your back-breaking work. You're putting together your suffering and your growth. That's what karpas is saying, that suffering and growth come together. That's what Jewish history has showed us. That when you have hard work in the book of Exodus, know that redemption is about to come. When you see truth thrown to the ground, imagine that it's just being planted and that greater truth is going to grow out of it. But you just need some patience, because that's what happens, is that it stays in the ground, is that the seed does what seeds do, and that ultimately that seed will be destroyed, but what grows from it will be so much more plentiful and powerful. And I think that's his message. That's Rav Moshe Shapiro's springtime interpretation. That's Aviv. That's hidden in the hard work. If you look closely enough at the hard work, if you contemplate on that verse, that the children of Israel suffered hard work, if you focus on it long enough, you know what message you're going to get out of it? Aviv, spring. And I think that's a very beautiful and generous interpretation of the Passover experience that explains why it is this time of year, and explains the karpas ritual, and explains so much about the cycle of Jewish history, that sometimes things need to be destroyed in order for greater ideas, concepts, and hopes to be born. Okay, that's the idea I wanted to share. Maybe we'll stop the recording now if anyone wants to bat around some ideas or even some teachings for Passover.
Rabbi,
Message.
if you allow me, I'm not sure destroy is the right word.
Mhm.
I think what we're talking about is decay,
Nice.
and seeds decay, and that's part of the growth cycle.
Right.